reading from the Gospel of John. Then each of them went home, while Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go away, and from now on, do not sin again." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
I invite you all to pick up a stone that is in your hand. Feel the weight of the stone in your hand, the texture. Is it cold? Is it warm? How does it feel in your hand? I invite you to hold the stone and consider all of these things as we talk about this text today. Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. One of the telling things to me about this scripture is that some scholars don't even consider it a part of Scripture, a true part, a real part. There's debate about when it actually showed up, whether it actually belongs in the Gospel of John, and therefore, many commentators just leave it out. They just don't even comment on it except to say, this maybe didn't really belong there, we're just going to skip over it. It's telling to me, and it really impacted me as I read and worked on preaching this sermon to see how once again this woman was forgotten and forgotten and forgotten. Even in common interpretations and sermons that at least I've gotten to hear on this text, the focus isn't on her. The focus isn't on what exactly is happening there. We so often get sidetracked by Jesus bends down to start writing in the dirt. It's, oh, what's he writing? Is he writing their sins? Is that why they, leave? Is that why they think they should just put the stone down and go? Or maybe he's doodling and he's just trying to stall so that he doesn't have to answer questions. Because this is a trap. Once again, the Pharisees and the scribes are trying to trap Jesus. Because there were the two laws at the time. There was this law of Moses, which, by the way, called for the stoning of both men of adultery. You may notice there is only a woman who is brought forward here. Then there is the Roman law, which forbade the Jews from putting anyone to death. So in coming to Jesus with this accusation, the scribes and the Pharisees are trying to get him to pick one or the other. And which one are you? Will you blaspheme? Are you with Rome? Or are you going to allow us to break the Roman law and get in trouble that way? Remember, Jesus is teaching in the temple. They have come up and interrupted where Jesus is teaching at the temple to do this. We're going to catch him here. Right, simply. Who knows what? I don't know if it matters. Maybe he was solemn. But this woman so much of the focus also ends up landing on the sin of the woman. She is presented as this sinful, fallen image, as an example of what is breaking the laws and what is going against God, and this way to trap the teacher. She's not presented as a human being. She's not presented as a person with any kind of dignity or integrity. She's a sinner. We don't know the story. Maybe she was trapped. She's being used this whole time. She's a pawn in this ploy to trap Jesus. She has no agency. She's been yanked. Who knows if she is even fully clothed at this point? She may not be clothed at all. She's surrounded by men who have dragged her out of wherever it is. Maybe her hair is falling in front of her face. She's not looking at anyone. Maybe that's why Jesus is writing, because her gaze is directed downward. And he's trying to take the focus off of her. We don't know. This woman, the sin of adultery, there were so many things that I learned in preparing this about why it was such an affront. And again, this was also women as property. There's another part of it here. Because the sin was if a man would lie with another man's wife. Or if a wife would lie with another man. But more often than not, the agency here is on the man having ownership of the wife, and therefore being able to punish the wife should she be caught in adultery, and the man who thieved stole her from him. And there was also a law in Deuteronomy and Leviticus are the places where we find that you should stone the people caught in adultery. There's also provision for a rite, a ritual, where a husband who in jealousy or whatever may be coming up can accuse his wife of adultery, and she, whether or not it is an accusation in good faith, is put through this ritual where the priest mixes dust and dirt from the temple floor with holy water, messes up her hair, and forces her to drink it, with the idea being that she will take on a curse if indeed she has been adulterous, if indeed she has sinned, and she will become barren, and she will experience pain. And as I read about this, what I read is even if the woman is innocent, this water would have caused considerable pain as this dust and this dirt, and God knows what, that came off the temple floor mixes through her intestinal tract. So this woman in the story today, maybe she did. Maybe she absolutely engaged in act of adultery. That is 100% a possibility. Who knows if she was being used at home and found solace somewhere else? Perhaps she was raped. Perhaps she was tricked. But now she's been dragged in front of Jesus. And the people around her begin to pick up stones. They've already condemned her. They already know. And she's presented now as what not to be. But Jesus, perhaps praying, talking with God, what am I doing here? How do I go against the status quo? How do I move against this system? How do I show a different way to be? Eventually says, let you who are without sin throw the first stone. Imagine all the laws that these scribes and Pharisees are holding on to, that they dare throw a stone after that is presented, knowing that, well, so-and-so knows that I've done it to him something. It says that the eldest moved away first. Perhaps because in their wisdom they knew where this was headed. And eventually all of them move away. And Jesus says, neither do I condemn you. Now, there are two ways that I see this in terms of looking at this as something that can be used against women. Again, showing this woman as the epitome of sin. Here she is, she's the fallen woman, descendant of Eve. Is it enough that Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more? who was there to offer her clothing and water, to offer pastoral care for this traumatic experience that she's gone through. In my summer CPE, I was in a group of all men. We often had another female who would come in to be a co-leader, but there were some days that I was the only female identified person in the group. And on one of these, and I noticed behavior very different on those days. And on one of those days, the supervisor actually made a joke about this gospel. He said, story comes and Jesus says, let he who is without sin throw the first stone, and a stone hits the woman and falls to the ground, and Jesus turns and says, Mom, not you. And all the guys laughed. And I didn't, and I said, I don't think that's funny. I said, first of all, my understanding of Mary is not a person. My understanding of Mary is someone who's going to be like, come with me, child. Let me care for you. Let me tend to your wounds. So how do we find good news in this story? Because I know I've just been kind of weak up here. The good news perhaps in what it calls us to be. That each day, especially as leaders in ministry and in church, there are going to be times that people are brought before us. Accusations are brought before us. If we open our eyes, we may see how passages like this and others, when tended to in different ways, will cause women to be painted in a different light in the church. I can speak to you as a woman in ministry who experiences that as people feel they have a right to talk to me in a certain way, to make comments on my appearance, perhaps to accuse me of being a little too friendly with certain parishioners. I have noticed a man can get away with flirting in the church far more than a woman. So the good news, if I dare say, with this text and with these things brought forward, and in the midst of this Me Too movement, as women are coming forward time and time again, I mean, maybe there was a Harvey Weinstein in this story, I don't know, and that's why the man hasn't been brought forward. But it calls us to the accountability of showing up and listening and hearing all voices that are presented, honoring all voices that are presented, hearing all sides of the story, and not being so quick to dismiss and say, go and sin no more, but to ask ourselves, what is my role in pastoral care with this person? What is my role in soul care with this person? And how do I engage in relationships then with the rest of my congregation? That maybe things like this won't happen again, or there's a lecture series we can do, or there's a book we can read, or a class we can engage in, or a women's shelter we can go to ministry at. How do we move forward? So I call to us in that, to consider these things. And as we continue to hear scriptures, especially the difficult texts which pull on our heartstrings and may cause us to want to simply ignore or glaze over, as so many of the scholars did in these commentaries, but instead to take that opportunity to look at them and ask, what is this calling me to do today? I notice none of you have thrown your stones at me, and I thank you for that. And you don't have to keep holding on to them, but thank you for engaging in that with me and feeling the physicality of one of the pieces of this story as we talk today. Go with God.